was around 7 years old, I joined my first ever orchestra, playing the violin. Now, I expect it probably sounded pretty dire, but I loved it. And I'll never forget going home to my parents and saying, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And for the next several years of my life, I worked really hard. I was fortunate enough to be blessed with some natural talent, but actually, in reality, the natural talent wouldn't have got me where I wanted to get to. I needed to work. I needed to practice. I needed to do day after day the boring things like scales and studies and technical exercises. And yes, there was some fun along the way. There were the lovely pieces, there were the orchestral opportunities, but I'd never have got there without the hard graft. Why am I telling you this? There's a passage in Hebrews in chapter 12 verses 7 to 11 which talks about us having to endure hardship as discipline. Now let me just be clear, this isn't saying that hardship is discipline. That isn't what Paul was saying here. So COVID-19 or grief or whatever we might be struggling with right now in this present time, Paul isn't saying that that is God's discipline, but we are told that we are to endure hardship as though it were discipline. Now, discipline is a positive thing. We can often think of it negatively, but actually it's a positive thing. Another way to translate the Greek word is to use the word for training, or, as I've already talked about, for practicing. Rather like athletes, or in my case, musicians or artists. All of these people have to put themselves through some kind of hardship in order to become the best they can be, in order to fulfill their potential. And that's the mindset we're called to bring to hardship. And maybe that's the mindset to therefore bring to our current situation. Are you willing to approach the situation we currently find ourselves in, which for most of us is hard in various different ways? Are you willing to approach it as a time of intentional discipline or training? Or are you just trying to grin and bear it and get along as best you can until it's all over? The Hebrews mentality is really about encouraging us to bring all of ourselves to every day, to intentionally say, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to grow. And of course, we're not talking in this instance about becoming good quality musicians or artists or athletes. What Paul is talking about is becoming disciples who become more and more like Christ. So how about you intentionally, with God, say, I'm going to use this time of hardship to train to become more and more like Christ, more like one of his disciples. Isn't it interesting, in fact, that the root for disciple and discipline is the same? We all have the potential to let this time form us into disciples who become more and more like Jesus. We need the Holy Spirit for that too. We don't do it on our own. The Holy Spirit works in us and transforms us, but our effort is required. I wonder what that might look like for you. Maybe there's something about becoming more generous during this time, or more willing to surrender to your own control, not saying I have to control everything, to allow God to work through you. Maybe it's about becoming more humble. I don't know what it might be for you. Maybe there's something about patience for you. But whatever it is, I encourage you to use this time of hardship well, to intentionally say to God, work through me with your Holy Spirit, but help me to train well that I may become more like you. Amen.